housekeeping. So Professor Simone Benita is coming here it will be on a Zoom call in November. He's working on new drugs to help treat illnesses faster, technology that can help COVID patients, and many more. That'll be November 11th at noon Pacific time for a lunch webinar, so please put that on your calendar. In October, we're lucky to host an interesting conversation between Ambassador Yossi Gal and Dan Meridor. They will discuss changes in the Middle East, challenges and opportunities for Israel. Ambassador Gal is the Hebrew University Vice President for University Advancement and External Relations, and was the Israeli ambassador to France, Monaco, and the Netherlands. Dan is a former member of the Israeli Knesset and currently the president of the Israel Council on Foreign Relations. This meeting event will be on Sunday, October 18th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. This is one you'll want to hear. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's featured speaker, Professor Tishby, the Ruth and Stan Flinkman Chair for Brain Research at the Edmund and Lily Safra Center for Brain Science. Before I hand it over to Ruth to introduce him, I just wanted to say that we had the pleasure of hosting Professor Tishby 2 years ago. We had him in my office with a small group, and then we actually had a dinner, and I had a chance to get to know him a little bit and learn more about his research and actually get his view on some facial recognition technology that I was working on. And this was one of the most interesting sessions I've had since I've heard all this professors speak. So I'm really looking forward to hear what you've been up to recently. I want to hand it over to Western board member Ruth Flinkman-Morandi, who's been affiliated with Hebrew University for over 50 years and who sponsors the chair to introduce Professor Tishby.
Thank you, Mark. It is my honor to introduce one of the shining stars of the Hebrew University, my friend, Professor Naftali Tishby. Tali is one of the leaders in machine learning research and computational neuroscience in Israel, and his numerous former students serve in key academic and industrial research positions all over the world. He was the founding chairperson of Hebrew University's Computer Engineering Program and director of its Leibniz Research Center in Computer Science. He received his PhD in theoretical physics from the Hebrew University and was a research staff member of MIT and Bell Labs from 1985 to 1991. Tali works at the interface between computer science, fictions, and biology, which provides some of the most challenging problems in today's science and technology. He focuses on organizing computational principles that govern information processing in biology at all levels. Most recently, Professor Tishby was awarded the IBT Mathematical Neuroscience Award at BrainTech in 2019. The prize honors researchers who have significantly advanced our understanding of the neural mechanisms of perception, behavior, and thought through the application of mathematical analysis and theoretical modeling. I hope you find his work as interesting as I do. Tali, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth. Welcome. It's really a pleasure to see so many familiar faces, and I really hope to be able to see you again soon, live, face to face, as we all would like to. So, I'm giving you some talk on the connection between. I want to talk to you. I mean, it's completely informally about the connection between artificial intelligence and the brain. But I really want to make it a little bit wider, in the sense that I want to address those challenging issues. To what extent machines can replace us? What are the consequences of the fact that they do so well on so many problems that we used to consider only us humans as able to cope with? And what does it tell us about our brain, or where is really this boundary between machines and biological intelligence? And that's that's one of the problem I'm very much interested in deciphering in some sense. I mean, where is this boundary, and how is this artificial intelligence revolution, the thing that we all witness, some of you probably right on your phones or on your computers or wherever you go. I mean, you can't avoid it. It's there. And so first of all, I want to make sure that you acknowledge the fact that we are in some historical revolution in that sense. And second, I want to really focus on this more or less philosophical question. I mean, where is this boundary between us and machines? And so let me see if I can change slides here. Yeah. So essentially, I mean, I'm not sure exactly how much time I have, but please ask questions if you can, using the chat facility here, and or even just burst the. It's a small group, so just ask question. We'll all see it, I hope. And so the general issue is really this puzzle. I mean, so first of all, why do we believe that we live in a revolution? I mean, in what sense this AI dream is something which turned from a complete science fiction idea in the 50s and 60s, which never worked well, into something which really is part of our life to an extent that begins to replace us in some sense. So this is the dreams and the puzzle. And then I want to focus on an issue I don't think I mentioned last time we talked, but the fact that machines like computers are essentially very simple devices. They are what we call sensing acting automata. They sense the world through some sorts of the vision, hearing, auditory sensing, smelling, touching, and so on, just like us. I mean, so and they actually, I mean, artificial machines can have senses that we don't have, like seeing heat or seeing in infrared or seeing in all sorts of wavelengths that we are not sensitive to. And but at the same time, what makes them really intelligent or alive, in my definition of life, is that they don't only sense the environment, they also act, they also behave. And there is this concept which I'll try to convey to you of a sensing acting machine. I mean, and that's essentially all those machines are. I mean, they are machines that sense the world and then behave. And on the other hand, there is this dream of general intelligence. I mean, we believe, or we want to believe, that we are a little more than that. I mean, that we sense we do something which has in it intuition and understanding and insight. I mean, so you think about understanding. I mean, this is a very strange thing. I mean, let's say we understand the mathematical theorem in school. I mean, so there's some aha effect. That's something which we don't really feel like a mechanical thing. I mean, this is this insight that gives us this deeper understanding of things. And some very, very serious and very prominent researchers really believe until today that this general intelligence, this insight and understanding that humans call intelligence, is something which cannot be mimicked by an automaton, by a machine. So I want to confront a little bit these two views and where do we stand about it. And so this is what I call the understanding conundrum. But then there is this question about, okay, it turns out that we push this boundary between what sensing acting automata can do and what is left for us natural human biological intelligence to do. And the question is really, where is this boundary? Can we actually identify it? Because it's not very clear. Some of us believe that machines can achieve this general intelligence, this doing everything just like humans, and some others are very strong in their belief that we are different. I mean, and there is a fundamental difference between machines, sensing acting machines like this, and human biological intelligence. But the question that we are really focusing on in our brain center is actually reversing this question and ask, what does the success of AI the ability to do such complicated things that I'll show you immediately, tell us about the understanding of our own brain. And that's something I just want to share with you a little bit about it. I want to talk a little bit about where is this revolution taking us. I mean, there's a lot of fear and anxiety about artificial intelligence in the general public. I mean, because if machines are really, can they really replace us? I mean, should we fear that they're going to just throw us away, or maybe it's actually going in another direction, which is what I think essentially is just enhancing humanity, not replacing humanity. So essentially, intelligent machines, I mean, are just like other aids that we all use. I mean, you know, we all use all sorts of augmented technology to see better, to hear better, to walk better, to drive us from place to place, and so on. I mean, although every one of those technological revolutions, in some sense, replace some jobs of humans, eventually it just enhances us as humanity. So we shouldn't really fear machines that can read for us, or even write for us, or even, you know, help us in creativity and in finding new ideas, even in art and in music and whatever. Should we fear it, or should we actually take it and use it just in the same way that we use our glasses to see better, to think better, to write better, and to be better? And that's the way I think about it. It's not a replacement for humanity, it's enhancing humanity. So let me just very briefly compare computers and brains. I mean, so again, if this is getting a little bit too technical, let me know. So you know that computers are made out of elements that we call logic gates. I mean, so those are very basic things that can do things like A and B, or A or B, or A and not B, or A, and so on. I mean, so these are very simple logical elements that we usually do on binary yes/no questions, or yes/no quantities, true or false. I mean, is something true or something false? And as I'm sure some of you know, I mean, there's a whole mathematics, essentially everything that the computer can do, any function, any you know, when you use words, or when you use Zoom, or when you use any other program, it's essentially boils down eventually to logic gates in the computer that eventually manifest and generate this ability to, so any function, what we call algorithm, or algorithmic function of the computer, is based on these logic gates. On the other hand, our biological brains are made of the basic elements, the basic computational elements of the brain are what we call neurons, which are biological cells, just like every other part of our organs, of our body, like the skin, or like the liver, or like anything else, the blood cells. And these cells are living entities which have a very complex metabolism, but eventually when we put them in the brain and they act as neurons, they operate. Sorry, is there a question? No. So they function in something which is very similar to a logic gate. So in some sense, they are very different. They are biological organs. They are cells with all the complicated aspects of living cells. On the other hand, they process information like by synapses and dendrites and the functions of neurons, which eventually behave like a logical gate in some sense. And that's really the basis of what we now call neural networks and our computational understanding of the brain. Yes, please ask if there is a question there. Or maybe there's some, I hear some sound, but I don't see anyone. Anyway, the next level of computation in computer is what we call logic circuits. So we put logic gates together in a way which do more complicated things, like adding numbers or multiplying numbers or things like this, which these are all done by certain logic circuits in the brain, in the computer. And the same, very similar things happen in the brain. There are small neural networks, which are those small circuits that we find in every brain from very primitive elements, even insects or invertebrates and so on, all the way to mammals. All biological organisms on Earth, at least, are built on these small neural networks, which are very comparable to small logical circuits in the brain. But then there are all sorts of differences. For example, computers are based on what we call digital computation, which means that they work with bits, with yes, no, with 0, 1s. I mean, with very simple binary dichotomies, where it seems like that biology is working with analog computation, or something which is more soft and continuous. But that's not entirely true, because we know that neurons are in some sense digital. I mean, they fire or they don't fire. They have those spikes that behave in some sense like digital. So it's some sort of a mixture of digital and analog. Computers have a central processing unit, what we call CPU. I mean, so all your computers, the computers that you're all holding now, one way or another, to see me, have a very important central processing unit, or CPU, and have separate memory units where you store the memory, you store your pictures, you store your voice, you store your videos, and so on. And these are very different things in the computer, in the classical computer, but in the brain we know that there is no such distinction. We don't have a central processing unit in the brain. We have both memory and computation is done everywhere. I mean, the neurons are both elements of computation, like the CPU, and are memory elements. But we know that this distinction is actually blurred a little bit, because modern computers really have getting more and more like brains, in the sense that the CPU is now distributed over many places, and the memory become more and more active, just like the memory of the biology. So this distinction is probably not as sharp as it used to be. There's another thing which is actually quite important about computers, important to understand. It's based on the idea that of Alan Turing from the 40s and 30s, actually, of universal computing. The fact that there is one machine that can essentially run any other program. So you buy one computer, which is essentially a universal machine. You don't really care which one, except from, you know, cost and some technical abilities. This machine can run using a software or operating systems or things like this. Essentially, any other act like any other Turing machine, or can run Word or Excel, or play sound, or play music, or play video, or do many other things that you can do on computers. So it's a universal computer, and that's a very fundamental concept in computer science, the fact that we have things as universal. One machine can run all others and simulate all others, whereas in the brain we find everything seems to be specialized by evolution to very specific function. I mean, we have the eye, which is just like a camera. We have the ear, and we have a memory for sound, and we have memory for speech and language, and we have memory for vision and so on, and seem to be local and specific. But again, this distinction is not real, because when you look at the local neural circuitry in the brain, you see the same pattern and the same structure and the same architecture again and again. So the brain, although things are localized and specialized, they are based on things which look very much universal. The same neurons can do different things in the brain. And some of you may know, for example, blind, genetically blind from birth people use the visual brain area in normal seeing people for actually storing language and memories of other types. So we know that different parts of the brain of people who had some sort of lesion or some sort of, let's say, stroke, and lost parts of the brain, sometimes, if they're lucky, other parts of the brain can take over the functions of this part, and they can maybe walk again or talk again or do things that they lost for a while, although the brain is damaged. So there is some fantastic adaptivity and universality also in biological organs. There's one technical difference between the brain and the computer, which you're all aware of, and that the computer is very dense in terms of the density of the elements. So it's built on units which are of size or nanometric scale, whereas and it's actually very fast. I mean, the mechanical computer, the electronic computer that we're using today is based on cycles, on clocks which run in gigahertz. I mean, in billions of operation per second, whereas the biological brain is very slow in comparison. I mean, it's worked on elements that are processing information on a millisecond as time scale, which is kilohertz if you want, very, very slow processing compared to the brain. And it's actually very sparse. I mean, most of the brain is not active most of the time. So there's a very big, it seems like the computer is very much more advanced in terms of speed and density, but there's a cost to that, a very high cost. The electronic brain is very energy inefficient. I mean, it's not, you need these batteries, or you need this to charge it all the time. It's actually thousands times less efficient than the biological brain. And that's something we wish we could actually get closer to biology. This is one of the points where biology is a lot better than the electronic computer. And of course, there is this very basic thing that we all think we know. Computers are programmed by humans. I mean, humans give them instructions and tell them what to do through programming, whereas biology is, at least we believe, or some of us believe, that it's evolutionary developed and self-organized in some sense. But we know, I put some question marks here because we know now, and especially in my area of research, machine learning, the human programming is no longer taken for granted. I mean, we actually don't really program our computers, and all of AI today is built on self-organization. It's on what we call machine learning, or learning. Essentially, I just show it data, show it examples of all sorts of things, and the computers self-organize in a way which I didn't program, or nobody programmed itself. So in some sense, we mimic evolution today. So this is no longer such a big distinction. I mean, we used to think that computers are all programmed by humans, so they cannot do things that humans don't tell them, but that's no longer true. They're getting much closer to biology in that sense. And there's another very important distinction. Computers still evolve in some sense exponentially fast, just like, you know, the pandemic. I mean, it grows very, very quickly. Exponentially means that it still doubles its ability and power and speed more or less every 2-3 years. And the technology, it's not quite like that anymore, but it used to obey something we call Moore's law, which essentially since the mid-60s in the 20th century until today, every 2 or 3 years, the power and speed and memory size and so on of computers doubled itself. So this is a very fast doubling time, whereas the brain, the biological brain, or biology in general, is not exponentially changing anymore. I mean, essentially our brain is like what it is now for at least 100,000 years. I mean, if we could meet our ancestors, let's say 5,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago, we would feel very close to them in terms of biology. They have the same abilities, they have the same brain size, they have the same cognitive abilities. That I guess that we couldn't see much of a difference. Although technology and culture and civilization actually brought us very far and made us very different from what used to be 100,000 years ago, there's not real big change in the biological brain. So in some sense, computers have the advantage, they're still developing, and the question is really, are they getting better ahead of us? And as I just said, I mean, everything in this area is based on mathematical ideas, on abstract concepts that were developed by actually can be rooted down to really two key people in the 20th century. One of them is Alan Turing, whom I'm sure you all heard about. He became a very famous figure and actually a very tragic figure, who really invented, in some extent out of nowhere, this concept of a universal computer, and also introduced this idea that our brain is not more than a universal computer, or now what we now call universal Turing machine. And in that sense, he really suggested and put forward this notion that computers can mimic the brain, and therefore anything the brain does, computers can also do. And this is really the beginning of what we now call artificial intelligence. At the same time, there's another fundamental mathematical concept behind everything we say, which is this notion of information. So both information and computation, which are the key elements of what we do in AI and in computational neuroscience, is so information was introduced and quantified. Of course, the notion of information has been around for many, many years, but the understanding what we mean by information is the answers to yes, no questions, to binary questions like, is this true or is it false? And this is what we call bits of information, is due to this American Claude Elwood Shannon, who lived before and after Turing, but and really more or less alone, self-handedly made this what we now call information theory, which essentially is the theory of communication, or how to transfer information from one place to another place, or from one human to another human, from one source to a receiver, and so on. And Shannon, I actually see these two pillars. I mean, the notion of universal computing of Turing, and the notion of information, of entropy, of whatever those functions that Shannon introduced into technology, as the two fundamental building blocks of both our understanding of biological intelligence and biological life in general, in my picture, and our ability to mimic them using computers and artificial devices. Okay, and Turing is usually depicted through this caricature of the universal Turing machine, like a logical head through which some sort of a tape of zeros and ones, which is infinitely long, go through. And this is exactly the mathematical concept of the Turing machine, which I'm sure some of you, so this caricature is in some sense Turing as a Turing machine. I mean, this is really capturing this notion that the brain is not more than a machine that writes on some tape and can only write 0 and 1 and erase them, of course. So, and which is what all we need in order to implement a modern computer. Now, the dream of AI in that sense is really the philosophy of this picture. Can we build machine that will behave and look, not necessarily look in the sense that they will look like us, but will behave like us, in the sense that if I see a robot and I shake its hand, it will be as natural for me as to shake the hand of a human. I mean, so can they really behave like that, like us, such that we will not make this distinction between a machine and not machine? So this is really the essence of what Turing called, or what you now call the Turing test of intelligence. I mean, can we build a machine which will behave as if it is a human? I mean, so either across some terminal or on email or on Zoom. I mean, are you really sure it's me, it's a human talking to you now and not a machine? I mean, how can you know? I mean, so if there was such a successful machine that can mimic a human being, and you can interact with it and ask questions and talk to it and so on, on every possible aspect of humanity or of human intelligence, and you will not see the difference between this, and you will not be sure that this is a real human or a real machine, then it passes what we call the Turing test. So the dream was born by Turing in the early 50s, just before he died in 1953. And it was a dream for a while. And actually, it evolved itself over the last 70 years. And it is now much more of a reality than it ever has been. I'll come back to the artificial intelligence being. I just want to focus on some of my own way of thinking about life. What is the connection between, well, what is really intelligence? I mean, and we talk about building an intelligent machine. How do you define intelligence? And this is actually a very challenging question. It's not so obvious what it is, but if you think about it, intelligence, or even if I ask you what is life, so most of you who studied some biology in school will tell me probably life is about reproduction and metabolic exchange of matter and energy with the environment, or something you eat and you behave and so on. So, and usually biology focuses on these two aspects of metabolic exchange and reproduction, being able to reproduce. But actually, when you think about it, the essence of life is exactly like the essence of intelligence, is the ability to make valuable predictions. And what do I mean by that? I mean, it's so if you think about these two animals here, I mean, the deer and the lion, some of you may remember this picture from 2 years ago, but it's both the life of both this creature depends on the ability to know or to predict where they're going to be in a few seconds ahead. If the lion thinks it's A and the deer thinks I actually going to move to C, its life depends on it. So now this is something which I take very, very seriously. I mean, so my definition of intelligence, and I specifically want to focus on this information processing ability, is the ability to exploit the past observations in order to make for future survival, or if you want to, for valuable predictions. I mean, so future survival is many things. I mean, it can be the ability to have offsprings, or the ability to acquire knowledge, or the ability to make money, or I don't know, whatever you think valuable, to take as valuable. But so I don't care really what is it, but this ability to use the past for valuable future is something which I can quantify very abstractly using the language of information. So essentially it's exploiting information from the past in order to make valuable predictions. And that's something which I take very, very seriously in my own research. I mean, it's this notion which I call predictive information. I mean, how much we actually can exploit the past for valuable prediction in the future. And as strange as it sounds, this is actually a general enough definition of intelligence and life. And the only question is really how much information we can actually use from the future, from the past about the future. So ability to make predictions. And most of you will say, but we can't really make predictions. I mean, but it's not really true. I mean, most of the time, except from crazy years like this one where we can't predict anything, but in normal times, we always make predictions. I mean, you all knew that we are going to have a meeting on Zoom, as strange as it sounds, this evening for you and this morning for me, a month ago, and this prediction turns out to be correct. I mean, so and there are many, of course, other predictions like this that we all make. And actually, if you think about it, we couldn't really survive without being able to predict the future. When things become completely chaotic and our ability to make predictions is lost, we lose the ability, we can't live, we can't survive. So completely unpredictable environment is not something which supports life. And life is supported by the ability to make the environment more and more organized and more predictable. Okay, but of course, you know, a stone on the ground is very predictable. It's just lying there, it's not doing anything. So this is not alive. I need a little more than just being predictable. So of course, I need it to have structure as well. So it's not just the ability to make prediction, but the ability to change in a predictable way. And that's precisely, this particular concept is precisely what is captured by this notion of predictive information, which is something I introduced together with others 20-something years ago, and is still the key of my own research. So this is this ability to exploit the past in order to make some prediction of the future. So, and essentially the way we do it is by creating some sort of internal representations, which can be very abstract. I mean, they can be stored in memory, in biological memory, like in our neurons in the brain, or they can be stored in the memory of a computer, or they can be stored in the memory of some machine, you know, like your cleaning robot or something. But this ability to remember things from the past in order to make good predictions of the future is really at the core of and the heart and the fundamental definition of our ability to act in an intelligent way and actually to leave it all. Even viruses, to some extent, viruses are not really alive in that sense because they're not independent, but we're actually, when they're parasites, I mean, they depend on cells in order to multiply and survive, but we're all parasites to some extent. I mean, we all depend on other organisms to survive. So I'm not sure this distinction is very sharp, but there's no living organism who doesn't depend on other organisms to some extent to survive, but they all process information from the past in order to make valuable prediction in the future. And that's something which I can quantify. I can ask how much information is used and how much of it is actually valuable in the future, and how complex is this internal representation which we form in our brains or we form in our computer. And that's part of my own work. I mean, how to quantify this ability to process information from the past, and in the same mechanism, the same type of definition, I can quantify biological life and I can quantify artificial life or artificial intelligence in the same language. And that's the beauty of this mathematical definition. It doesn't depend on the biochemistry or or other particular processing that happens in particular biology. So this is a way of thinking about life in a very general, very abstract way. It's not the physical, it's this information processing ability. Now, I know that I'm already getting a little bit ahead of myself in terms of abstraction, but think about, again, this flow of time from past to future. And I always like to bring the example of music, which I know many of you love and appreciate, or maybe even make music. Music is one of those concepts, or one of those form of arts, if you want, that are built very strongly on this particular notion of being predictable on one hand and being unpredictable or surprising on the other hand, and this ability to cause us this joy of music or joy of art in general is a specific exploitation of this fundamental aspect of life that is built or created or is based on the ability to make predictions. And the fact that we enjoy music is because music is in some sense predictable, let's say in the beats or in the melody or in the harmony or whatever musical aspect you are thinking about. It has this predictable aspects. I mean, I know that things are supposed to happen in the center rhythm or a certain key or a certain harmony or whatever. But then if it's good music, it's able to surprise me here again and again and actually create this anticipation for something new all the time. So the complexity of music is based on the same idea of the complexity of predictions in life. And actually, I argue that the same is true for any form of art, whether it's plastic art or movies or literature or music or whatever. So the brain is all about extracting these efficient, predictive internal representations. That's what we do. But that's something very simple. I mean, think about this cleaning robot that some of you may have at home. This is an automaton, a machine, which has everything that I mentioned. I mean, so it senses the environment through this mechanical sensors like the bumpers or the optical sensor or whatever, and it acts and behaves. So essentially, it has all the elements of this predictive automata, and it actually has some sort of an internal representation of the environment of our room. So if some of those smarter robots today can actually learn the structure of our house and know exactly which rooms are supposed to be cleaned more often and so on. And so it has this cycle of information processing, so sensing, remembering, acting, sensing again, and so on, which we call the metabolic information processing. Essentially, so sensor information is received and then used for actions and plans and learning this predictive representation. So even this very stupid element, stupid robot, which is really stupid. I mean, you can't think of anything more stupid than that, is already having all the complexity of life in some sense. The only difference is the size of its memory, the complexity of its sensing and acting. But in principle, it has the same complexity. So is it really true that that all we are are such cleaning robots to some extent, or maybe there's something more than it. So we would like to think, I mean, is there any room for something like self-awareness or consciousness in cleaning robots? And I think that most of you will tell me no, of course not. I mean, how can a robot be conscious? Or how can a stupid machine like this can be conscious? But when you think about it, I mean, a little more, you realize that actually maybe I shouldn't take for granted the stupidity of this robot, because it can actually organize the dust in my room in a way which acts like exactly like a Turing machine. I mean, I can actually arrange, it can move dust from one place to another and use my room as a memory, if you think about it. So in principle, such a robot can be as complicated as a universal Turing machine, and can do anything a Turing machine can do. So maybe it's not as stupid as we think. So what is really the difference between us and robots in that sense? So it's, of course, robots don't really make long-term planning. I mean, that's one thing that we think we know how to do better. So like playing chess, for example. So when we play chess, we don't just sense and act and sense and act. If you play chess like this, you're going to be a very poor player. I mean, just moving the tools around. I did something, you do something in reaction. It's a very primitive way of playing chess. Usually what we do is we have some goal, we plan ahead. I mean, we think, okay, that's where we are now, that's where we want to be. I want to give a chess mate somewhere, but so then I need to go backward and see, okay, if that's what I want to do, I go backward in time and I ask, what should I do now? And this is called planning. Okay. But planning is something machines can do very well today. You all have those planning GPS navigators in your cars or wherever, and you tell them, okay, I want to get to another city, and then it plans the way for you, and give you essentially the instruction, turn right, turn left, and so on, by essentially making this plan backward in time for you. That's not something which seems to be terribly intelligent. I mean, okay, of course, I have to take into account all the different traffic and so on. But this is done on a daily basis all the time by machines everywhere. So planning is not something which really makes the distinction between us and machines. I mean, that's something machines can do. And indeed, in our brain science, we think about animals like this rat here as a sensing acting machine. I mean, it has this sensory information coming from auditory or smell or whatever, mechanical, like the vibrissa or like whatever, and seeing, of course, and it has actions, and I can mimic a rat with a machine. Sorry, my alarm. This is when I'm supposed to wake up today, but so this rat is not more than the cleaning robot in some sense, and it has a very interesting memory. It's essentially encoding the sensory information in some memory, in biological memory, in neurons, and then acts accordingly all the time. And this paradigm that animals and humans are not more than sensing acting machines is at the center of our modern brain science, neuroscience, and we all take it for granted. But is it really true? I mean, is there really nothing more than sensing acting machine? And when you think about our brain, so this is just one hemisphere of our cortex, of our cerebral cortex, and what's underneath our skull. And so what you see here is that our brain is to a large extent a sensing acting machine, in the sense that half of the brain, the blue side or the left side, the right side here, is essentially all about perceptual information. I mean, things that we receive from the environment, from the world, through senses like smell, touch, and so on, and vision, and stored and processed in our back part of the brain. the dorsal part of the brain. And on the other hand, the frontal part of our brain, the red part, is all about what we call executive functions. I mean, making predictions, making plans, thinking ahead in time. And essentially, the brain is not more than this cycle of a flow of information from us back to the world, and it happens on multiple time scales, and that's very, very important. I mean, so the thing that happens immediately on a millisecond time scale, and the thing that happens much slower, like, you know, this talk, or like, you know, planning for tomorrow or planning for next year and so on. So in our life, we have many, many cycles of plans like this, but they're all based on the same principle: store information from the environment in some clever way in our memory, and then apply it to an executive functions like acting, decision making, planning, thinking ahead, and so on. Okay, so in that sense, we are all under this now paradigm that the central task of our brain is prediction, and we are not more than sensing, acting automata on a very large and very sophisticated scale, but that's all we are. But if I go back to artificial intelligence, I mean, this dream that the brain is not more than a sensing, acting automaton was actually at the beginning a very poorly implemented. There were very, very funny failures of artificial intelligence in the 60s and 70s, and I'm sure some of you remember. So, for example, the whole thing was based on this very basic idea that we now call expert systems. I mean, so essentially, if I want to build a machine that can see or can walk, all I have to do is to find an expert on seeing or expert on walking, and all of us are, of course, experts on seeing and walking. We do it very well. So we just ask the expert, and we build some sort of a database or a knowledge base which represent the knowledge of the experts, like, you know, our doctor. And then we interface with some queries and get advices from the expert. And this notion of an expert system was the core of what we call artificial intelligence in the 60s and 70s. And of course, this failed miserably, because we could never even mimic a very simple expert, you know, like even things which are truly expertise, like a medical diagnosis, we couldn't really mimic just by asking an expert to tell us and then program it. I mean, so this idea of programming an expert, although seemed to be good enough, never worked. And of course, if you think about movies like 2001 of Kubrick, or like this famous joke about translation from language to language, which created all sorts of completely ridiculous examples of how artificial intelligence failed, gave a lot of us the feeling that artificial intelligence is a dream and it's never going to work. But then something very, and actually, maybe I should mention this, I mean, maybe the most impressive and most articulated manifestation of this idea that the brain is not more than is much more than just an automata. It's not algorithmic at all. Is expressed by Roger Penrose in a very famous book. It was famous in the 80s and 70s. It's still famous today, called The Emperor's New Mind, which essentially articulated this notion that we are not, we cannot be, in principle, according to him, just a sensing, acting automaton. I mean, just think that process information from the past, store it somehow in some memory, and then use it in the future. I mean, this is not us. I mean, and they always bring in his book, if you look at it, this notion of understanding, especially mathematical understanding. He's a mathematician, Roger Penrose. So mathematical understanding to him cannot be algorithmic. It's not something that you can write a set of simple logical rules which will eventually give you this aha, I understand something. And he expressed it really very eloquently and very nicely in this book, and which to me is still a very inspiring book, despite the fact that I strongly disagree with the main thesis of the book, that understanding requires self-awareness, and self-awareness requires consciousness, and consciousness is not algorithmic, it's not computable. and therefore cannot be done by a computer. But then Roger Penrose actually takes it much further and actually says, no, in order for something to develop consciousness, whatever that is, but something we all very much know that we have, and by almost by definition, but it's very hard for us to define. I mean, what do we actually mean by consciousness? Can I really attribute it only to a biological object, physical object, or maybe and not to a machine? So Penrose clearly take the position that a machine cannot be conscious, and therefore there must be something else because it's still a physical device. I mean, I think Penrose is a very materialistic and very much of a physicist himself, and so he says, I mean, he takes the position that this must rely on something which is non-computable, and for him the physical manifestation of a non-algorithmic, non-computable things are not Turing machines, it's quantum mechanics. Whatever that is, I'm not going to get into it, but Penrose put consciousness on quantum mechanics, which is somewhat disturbing to a lot of us because we don't really think that we need quantum mechanics in order to be conscious. But so the question is really, okay, maybe even if I agree with Penrose, the question I'm asking is, where is this boundary? I mean, so where is the boundary between the sensing, acting, learning automaton that I described before and real understanding and intelligence? I mean, or what Penrose would like to call self-awareness and consciousness. Or in other words, is our brain more than a computer in some sense, or how can we know? So where can we put this boundary between these two things? And of course, computers were quite miserable in terms of achieving for many years these tasks of processing information and playing. I mean, they're still very, very far from us in terms of. For many years, they were at least like a joke. I mean, so AI, nobody really took AI seriously. But what things began to change more or less in 1997, at least in the perception of the public, when Garry Kasparov, the Russian champion of chess at the time, and world champion chess, was beaten actually quite miserably by a machine, by a computer, a computer called Deep Blue of IBM. And this was really the beginning of this shaking this concept that AI is a joke and maybe there's something more in it. And eventually this Deep Blue was not much more than a lookup table. I mean, an expert system in the old sense, because Deep Blue was a huge machine which was designed specifically for beating Kasparov in chess, more or less. I mean, it was just a table that tells us, in this board position do this, and the other board position do this, and you can think about it as a very big table. Of course, it wasn't exactly like this because this is impossible. Such a table is too large even for the largest possible computer. But it wasn't very clever. I mean, this machine couldn't do anything else other than playing chess. And so in that sense, although we started to, the idea that chess was considered, by the way, until that time, until 1997, the chess experts were quite confident that no computer will ever be able to beat the chess champion. I mean, this was championship. I mean, this was considered a very intelligent, truly intelligent function. And of course, most humans are not terribly good at it either. And that's why this was, when this happened, the whole idea that only us are intelligent and machines can never be intelligent started to shake. And of course, the whole thing got into even further. So there was another revolution, and this revolution happens recently. I mean, only about 20, 30 years ago, with the what we now call deep learning, with the idea that we can actually train a machine So playing chess was not a big deal, and after Kasparov was lost in suddenly winning in chess was not considered intelligent anymore. But from the other hand, recognizing faces or recognizing dogs from cats or so on, this was something which was considered very difficult and very human-like. And then it started to build this machine, which I built on some attempt to mimic the biological brain by mimicking the way neurons in the brain are connected to each other. So this is what we now call a neural network. Although it's completely artificial, we implement it on a computer. It is built on the same concept, on the same design and architecture that biological brains are built on. I mean, neurons which are connected to other neurons and form this chain of representations, which eventually lead to recognition of things like a dog. So again, this is again very much at the heart of my own work, and the ability to understand how exactly this machine works is a very tough problem, and there's a very strong competition still running out in the world trying to theoretically understand how this machine works, and I'm one of those competitors. But of course, the whole thing is highly still in the making. And there's a lot of many open questions there. But essentially, just take a picture of a dog, just like this one here, and eventually utter the word dog, and versus a picture of a cat, and uttering cat. This is not something which is very simple. Essentially, what's really going on here? I mean, is it just can we just attribute it again to this cycle of information? Although there's nothing else than a processing of information, of sensory information, through a cascade of those internal representations in the layer of this neural network, and eventually uttering dog. It seemed to be magical in the sense that we don't really understand how it happens. And that's really what happens in deep learning. So essentially, when you think about artificial intelligence, there are these three phases that we now need to to make. The first one was this the first one was the 1950s to 1980s, more or less, where the artificial intelligence were all based on logic and on logical gates, on very simple expert rules, systems and rule-based systems, which essentially I just program the rules, I just dictate the machine, tell it what to do. And then in the mid-80s till the mid-2000s, more or less, there was this idea of statistical learning. We just show it examples of, let's say, dogs, pictures of dogs and pictures of images, pictures of cats, and tell them this is a dog and this is a cat. And then the machine learned by itself, because instead of programming the rules, we program the learning rules. And this is what we call machine learning. And as you heard, I mean, I was in this business since the mid-80s, essentially, when it was born. And then there was a third phase. So machine learning did quite a lot of revolution to AI, but it got stuck somewhere in performance somewhere. And then this deep learning, going back to mimicking biology by designing these layers of neural networks, which is again copying what we see in our brain on a computer to some extent. This made the third big revolution, which is still going on. And we are and this really revolutionized things completely. We started to do things like image recognition, speech recognition. I mean, when you talk to Siri on your phone, or to Google Translate, or when you make music, and essentially those machines are making many interesting functions which we always considered to be non-achievable by machines. And maybe another landmark that we should all know of is in another game, which is called the game of Go, which was considered by many, including many experts in AI, as a much more difficult and much more complicated task than chess. And something that machine will not going to be able to dominate or to achieve expert level anytime soon. And actually in 2016, another machine, but this time based on neural networks and on deep learning, which means it's much more universal. It's not only playing Go, it's doing much more than that. actually managed to beat the world champion or at least one of the world experts in Korea in Go. And this was really such a shocking event that, you know, for Koreans, this was really a tragedy. I mean, that a machine could win in such a game. And today, what is really remarkable about AlphaGo, about this deep learning Go playing machine, is that it was based on competing with itself. I mean, essentially, we have two copies or two replica of the same machine, and they play with each other because humans didn't play well enough to actually train them. So they trained each other. It actually learned by itself to play Go and managed eventually to be not only better than any human, but also creative. I mean, in the sense that those machines make moves that no humans ever thought about. And actually most people didn't really understand why it making certain moves, and eventually it turned out to be better. So it turns out that this type of arena, I mean, playing games like this, which are considered really the peak of human intelligence to some extent, are really not such a big challenge for machines. On the other hand, walking, seeing, creating art and so on, these are things which are a lot harder. And but we are also making a very important, a very impressive progress in these domains. For example, describing the scene in this image. I mean, what if I ask a human what is in this image? So machines could tell you 10 years ago, 20 years ago, something like a brown bear is swimming in the water or something like this. But actually, and today they tell you two brown bears sitting on tops of rocks. And which then this particular jump between very naive, childish description to very sophisticated, detailed description, or exactly the train, saying that this is a train, or saying this is a blue train, blue and yellow train traveling on a train. This is precisely what, if you ask Google, let's say, you show it such an image, you get this is such a description. So for example, describing and what we call image understanding, I mean, really telling you what's going on in an image. This is something which in the last few years, there's a lot of progress. And actually, even in human language understanding, it's also something I'm doing partly in my time, in my research. I mean, how language is constructed, how we achieve this ability, for example, to translate accurately from one language to another. There's a huge progress in this in the last few years. And we come to the point where machines can run dialogues, run debates. I mean, not only win Watson on TV, but trivia games, but also express arguments in court or at the level of human experts. And that's something completely mind-boggling. So where is the boundary? I mean, so we see them driving cars, we see them operating for us in surgeons and machines, we see them creating arts. I mean, again, plot or paint this or produce a picture of Stanford in the style of Van Gogh. So you may not think that this is a great art, but this is something which machines can do today very easily on a regular basis. I mean, so learning the style of an artist and then creating new art in the same style and so on. So where is the boundary? I mean, so can you really tell me? So obviously things like IQ tests or like, you know, psychometric tests, which we used to think as the test of intelligence, are completely rubbish. I mean, we know that very stupid machines can pass them very successfully. But also these things like being artistic, being expressive, being imaginatory, and can we actually cope with this notion of aha? I mean, the understanding of Penrose. Can we find machines that actually do that? And that's again something I do in my own work. I mean, so we know that there are in learning, in machine learning, in AI, this notion of phase transitions. I mean, very sharp jumps between not understanding to understanding. So this aha effect, this deeper insight, deeper understanding of concepts is also not unique to humans. We can actually design very simple machines that have exactly the same behavior. And of course, AI generates a lot of economy and a lot of successful technology. And I don't have to tell you about that. I mean, in some sense, AI today is like energy, like electricity. I mean, it's actually driving everywhere. And you know, the power of economy, or the power even of countries is more related today to their ability to process data and information than their ability to make weapons or to store to consume energy. I mean, so that's again one of those things that we hear about. Okay, so I want to start wrapping up a little bit. I don't know how much time I have, but I guess I'm close to the end. So I just want to emphasize this notion that AI is actually improving very, very quickly. I mean, so this exponential growth of the power and ability of artificial systems, which we are still very much into, but again, try to focus on this question. I mean, so where is the boundary? I mean, can we draw a clear line between what machines can do and can't do? And the clear answer that we have today is that there's no such line. We can actually push the boundary in every direction that you put on this boundary of intelligence versus artificial, or biological versus artificial intelligence. And any challenge that you put, like, you know, playing chess, playing Go, playing music, creating art, being artistic, being imaginatory, proving mathematical theorems, being original, whatever, all of those specific frontiers are broken in some sense by this deep learning thing. Now, I have a few things here on our own work, which I don't want to get into. It's a little bit too technical. I just want to focus again on the relation to the brain and finish with it. So what does it tell us about the brain? I mean, what is the success of those deep learning or artificial neural network machines really tell us back about biology? And this is really where I find it's most amusing and most challenging today. I mean, we look at our visual system, for example, the way I look at this dog, and so I can think about it in terms of what happens in the brain. Is that the picture of the dog is stored in our retina and then excite all sorts of brain areas like V1, V2, and so on. And eventually somewhere here in the ventral cortex, we have in IT, we have this insight that suddenly, this is actually a dog. I see a dog. And there's a lot of information processing, which seems very similar to what happens in neural networks. I mean, so there's a representation from the retina to V1 and from V1 to V2 and so on. In each one of them, what we keep and what we remember and what we forget change. And this is precisely, again, the heart of my own theory, which we call the information bottleneck theory of the brain, which tells us that we always keep only the important information and ignore the irrelevant. So this learning, the ability to learn to ignore the irrelevant is maybe the core of intelligence. I mean, how to distinguish the important from the unimportant, from non-important. And this is precisely what we now formulate and capture by those principles of information processing that I'm working on. But we see that the same process, the same explanation that I have for how deep learning works, which I skipped in this talk, is what's happening in the brain itself. So we can actually mimic or model the behavior of the brain by what happens in a deep neural network that recognizes dogs or faces or whatever. And we see that there is really a very nice correspondence between the elements of the neural network and the element of the brain. Is there a question or something? No. So I just want to wrap up by showing you just another example of how this information theoretic or information bottleneck principle is working in art. For example, if you look at this famous picture of Van Gogh, the Starry Night, that I'm sure many of you know, and you ask yourself, why is this beautiful, or what's making it attractive to us humans? And the way we think about it today is that there is some sort of a curve that is generated by this image, which is made out of coarser or finer and finer representation of this image when I climb up on this curve. And which is, I mean, this curve is essentially how much information, how much predictive information this image has. I mean, so the same game that I play with music when I tell you that music is about predicting the next tone on the next beat or the next harmony and so on. Art is about predicting deeper and deeper into the structure. I mean, making sure that this is this a tree, or is this a human, or is this something else, a house? I mean, when you look at this picture from far away, you have all sorts of guesses, all sorts of prediction what's going on, and this type of prediction, this type of anticipation is creating some sort of appeal to you. I mean, so we're attracted to the image in order to reveal those questions that the coarser part of the picture is posing to you. And the closer you look, the more details you see. And if the picture is good, it keeps posing questions and new predictions that you are trying to fulfill by getting closer and closer. And this particular attraction to the image in order to understand what is it that you actually see there is precisely what makes this art so aesthetic to us. And this is at least one of the theories we are playing with. Okay, so I'm just want to finish with essentially summarizing. So we know that it's possible to build machines that we understand in principle every bit of it. I mean, how exactly it is built, but still not understand why and how it works on the large scale. So machines today share the same conundrum, the same problem that we have with the biological brain, that we know the details, but we don't understand the large scale structure. And in order to understand the large scale structure, we need to better understand this notion of understanding itself. I mean, what do we mean by it? And understanding, the meaning of understanding is precisely the kind of thing that happens by this jumps to better representation of the world, or those face transition, of this aha phenomena that we see both in machine and humans. And that's again one of the things that I claim to understand mathematically. I mean, this is some sort of a phase transition in representation. So okay, this is slightly different what I said. I mean, I summarize it even more. I just want to focus again on this message that AI is not going to replace us. It's actually part of us. It's one of our most impressive achievements as humans. I mean, the ability to transfer our biological cognitive functions into machines, and actually make them better in some aspects or many aspects of these cognitive functions, and then use them and enhance ourselves by essentially integrating machines and artificial intelligence into humanity. So they're not, according to at least my optimistic view, they're not going to replace us. They have absolutely no interest in doing it. They're going to enhance us and be part of us. And that's the way we should think about artificial intelligence. But the boundary is nowhere. I mean, essentially, we don't see today any real specific aspect of intelligence which is not shared or not conquered to some extent by machines. And therefore we have to abandon this view that our brain is more than a very complex hierarchical automata. At least that's the view I have on that. All right, thank you very much. I hope some of you got something out of it.
Thank you very much, Tali. That was really amazing, and the passion you have for your research, as I noticed when you were here, is infectious and just so interesting. And there's so many different applications. I know that it's getting late, and people we've run over a little bit, but if there's one or two questions, we can take them. Otherwise, I'm sure we can find a way to get people to send questions to you if they have them. But does anyone have a question that they're burning to ask right now?
Well, I see actually quite a lot of chats, but I'm not sure we're going to go through it. I didn't see it during the talk, but maybe you want to take some of them.
Hi, it's Sherry. I can ask Linda has a question. Do you believe in emotional intelligence? As you know, IQ in humans has been augmented by AI. Could there be AI for emotional intelligence? It involves reading people, nuance, and leadership through inspiration, not just analytics.
Yeah, so I know that most of you would like to think that emotional intelligence is fundamentally different than technical, what we call intelligent tests. I mean, so obviously there is something else. IQ and EQ are very different. But when we think about what machines can do today, I mean, like generating good music. So can machine be empathic, for example, or can machines really feel human suffering and human feelings in this classical sense of emotional intelligence? It turns out that as you actually see today, to some extent, you see that you put robots in elderly homes and they actually act as a service company to people, and to some extent, in some cases, better and more friendly than other humans. I mean, just like dogs and cats can be sometimes more friendly than humans, we see that it works. I mean, we don't understand why, but at least empathy is something that can be expressed and can be generated by machine. So you can think about it as being completely artificial. I mean, I just program it to be empathic. But remember that those machines learn from the humans, and they learn to respond in an empathic and emotionally responding way. So I don't see a fundamental difference here, although I know it's not something we all like to. I mean, I really want empathy, not from a machine, but from another human being. But we see today, I mean, it's actually happening in this world. I mean, especially under these times of Corona, that we put robots in elderly homes or in hospitals, and they are empathic and they serve as emotional objects to some extent, at least, and it's getting more and more like that. So it's not that it's already there. I mean, I still see some advantages to being human, but I don't see a fundamental barrier. I don't see something which they cannot cross, and in being more empathic and more emotionally intelligent. So as far as I'm concerned, you may find it disappointing, but there's no real boundary there.
Barbara, do you have a question? I know I'm just looking at the list here.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Professor. That was just absolutely fascinating. It's interesting. You just said that some of us may find that disappointing. And to that point, when you were talking about the response of the Koreans to the ability of the machine to win and go, or the chess game, I'm wondering what is it we fear? And as you were talking, it reminds me of the past century, all of these ideas that we've had about what makes humans different from animals, right? So when I was in college, it was tool use, right? And then, no, lots of animals use tools. And then it was like complex language, but then you have birds and whales, and then it was self-awareness, whatever. And as though there was this preoccupation to see what makes us unique and special. And do you see parallels with that? And I guess what I'm asking is, when you're kind of framing it, which I love, that this is an extension of us, not something separate from us, but it feels like we're being reassured. And I'm wondering where the pushback is and the ambivalence.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, what I'm saying is we are not yet there, and it's going to take a long time for machines to be able to aid us in all those different aspects. But actually, you see, this year, I mean, in particular this year, where in many situations humans cannot get in, and we need to replace them by all sorts of artificial devices. Including, by the way, what we are doing now. I mean, we are using machines to communicate and to some extent generate this feeling that we are almost together there. This is bridging or violating many of the classical notions of human contacts and human warmth and human touch. But we are still humans. But as I said, I mean, I could be, and today I'm not, but maybe in the not too far future, I could be just an avatar of me talking to you, and you will hardly notice the difference. I mean, so which means that and actually this extends us in so many interesting other ways. For example, I could be dead. I mean, I could not be there at all in any sense, and my memories and my ideas and my creativity and many other things could still be there and communicate with you. And this is one of those extensions of us that I believe AI can give us. I mean, it's going to completely blur the most horrible boundary, which is our death. I mean, and in some sense we could, and I entertain myself with this idea for many years. We could actually survive in some sense forever or after death, or communicate with people who don't know us or will never see us or are not here yet, and so on. And to some extent, AI is just pushing this, just as in the ability to write books and poetry and transfer us further into the future. You can now do it on a much more fully, voice and sound and vision and images and smell and whatever you want. And technology is just extending us to some sort, and extended so not only our existence but also our. So I don't see any reason why a machine will not be able to carry over my my empathy and warmth and humanity or whatever. No, so okay, it's a very optimistic view of things, but once you stop thinking about it as a competition, but rather as an augmentation, a mechanical augmentation, it allows us to, so those of us who are not such a good writers or are not such a, this can help us just as we do today. I mean, beyond spelling correction, I mean, a lot more than spelling correction. I can actually express ideas that I could not do myself using machines, and actually develop some sort of communication and dialogue with a machine, which will eventually carry my artistic abilities and my creativity and whatever anywhere I want. And I actually do it. I mean, I play the piano with a machine. I enjoy doing it very much. I mean, it follows me, or harmonizing me, or I can sing with the machine, or I can run a dialogue with the machine, argue with it, and so on, more and more than ever. So this boundary is simply very blurred. And when you think about it this way, it's actually a very exciting new world. It's not at all frightening, not to me at least. Anyway,
thank you.
I talked about it for a long time, I guess.
Thank you, as usual. This is so interesting. I have one final question, though, I have to ask. One of the things that we've learned with all the research that's being done with COVID right now at Hebrew University and all the projects that are being done, are you involved in any of them? And is there any application for AI in the research that's being done for COVID right now?
Absolutely. First of all, there's hardly a scientist in Israel who is not involved in it some way, because we all have opinions and we all feel it, and it's very important. So there is a lot of aspects of data science, which is just analyzing what is this flag, what is this disease, and what are the is lockdown a solution, or I mean, so. But I'm involved just in a little think tank, which is trying to help the government make a decision. Unfortunately, this is very frustrating, at least here in Israel. I mean, it doesn't really work because everything is so political. And but anyway, so
we have the same problem here.
Yeah, I know. I've been there. I think it's even worse in Israel right now. But
that's hard to believe.
It's hard to believe, yeah. But everything is political to such an extent that there's no single decision of the government which is accepted as necessary by anyone. So it's a very frustrating situation. But other than this think tank, I'm not directly involved in research. There's a lot of research about what's going to be next. I mean, predicting the ability of viruses, vaccines and so on. It's not my area, but I try to be involved as much as I can. Yeah. AI definitely has a lot to do with it, by the way. But yeah, it's another talk.
Thank you for staying on, and this has been a great conversation.
Yeah,
and Tali, as usual,
this was originally a 20-minute talk. I don't know how I managed to extend it so much.
So it's because it's all because of the passion you have for what your research, and that's so clear.
So I
So-
wanted to communicate, but anyway, I hope you're still there.
Tali,
Well,
Mark, I'd
Everyone
like
is
to
still here.
add my thanks, Tali, to you. As Mark mentioned, your passion is absolutely infectious and contagious, and we're so grateful to have you with us for our evening and to be enlightened and informed with your incredible presentation. And I want to thank Ruth and
Ruth,
Ben
yeah.
for
Yeah,
being
thank you, Ruth,
so
again.
incredibly dedicated for decades, and your care and your love and your involvement. And I wish everybody here, it's over a week, Lashana Tova, a happy, healthy, most of all, and happy New Year.
Thank you very much, Shana Tova, and thank you very much, Ruth, again, for everything.
Yeah. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
night.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Bye-bye.
We'll see you in Israel.
Absolutely.